The folder first appeared on a Tuesday. Not dramatically, not with shouting or accusations, or one of those theatrical family confrontations people like to describe online. No, it sat quietly beside my toaster oven, leaning against the sugar jar like it belonged there. Blue cardstock, my name written across the tab in Lauren's careful handwriting. Arthur Bellamy. Important documents. I noticed it while waiting for my coffee to drip through the old Mr. Coffee machine I'd bought at Walmart in 2014. The thing wheezed louder every year like an asthmatic dog, but it still made decent coffee if you tapped the side twice before brewing. I remember the exact morning because the weather radio kept warning about freezing rain, and because my left knee hurt badly enough that I had to use both hands to lower myself into the kitchen chair. Small details stick in your mind when you get older. The important things don't announce themselves properly anymore. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts from my bank, highlighted balances, mortgage documents for Lauren's house in Montclair, a brochure for something called Silver Pines Assisted Living Community. There was also a sticky note. We should talk this weekend. Love you, Lauren. I stared at that note for a long time while the coffee burned itself bitter. Outside my kitchen window, the branches of the maple tree scraped softly against the siding. The same tree my wife, Diane, planted in 1988 after we paid off our first real debt together. A miserable little hospital bill from when Lauren broke her wrist roller skating. Diane used to say trees made a house feel permanent. Funny thing to remember while holding a brochure for a nursing home. I turned 72 3 months earlier, February 11th, 2025. Lauren had taken me to dinner at an Italian restaurant where the waiter grated Parmesan over everything like he was trying to bury us alive in cheese. She paid the bill herself. That should have warned me something was wrong. My daughter never paid for dinner unless there was paperwork coming afterward. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast and lemon dish soap. My refrigerator hummed unevenly. The digital clock above the stove blinked 6:14 because I still hadn't figured out how to reset it after the last power outage. Confused old man. There's irony for you. I heard my phone buzz across the counter. Lauren, right on schedule. Morning, Dad. Her voice came quick and polished. The way people speak when they're already answering emails in their heads. Morning. Did you see the folder? I looked down at it again. The blue cardboard suddenly seemed brighter than before. I saw it. A pause. You didn't forget our conversation from Sunday, right? There it was. Gentle, casual. It slipped into the sentence like a razor blade hidden in butter. No, I said carefully. I remember the conversation. Another pause. Longer this time. Well, good. I could hear traffic in the background. Kevin and I are just worried about you. Kevin, her husband. The man wore loafers without socks in winter and spoke about tax brackets the way priests talk about salvation. I'm managing, I said. Dad. A sigh. You left your garage open all night last Thursday. I was carrying groceries. You forgot. No, I said quietly. I was tired. That annoyed silence children get when parents refuse to cooperate settled between us. For a moment I could picture her perfectly. Expensive camel-colored coat, Bluetooth headset. Coffee from that overpriced place she liked near her office. Probably standing outside her Lexus while pretending to be patient with me. Then she said it for the first time. You know, people your age don't always realize when they're getting confused. Not cruelly. That's the important part. Cruelty would have almost been easier. Instead, she said it gently, practically, like discussing weather conditions. I looked around my kitchen, the cracked ceramic fruit bowl Diane loved, the stack of unopened pharmacy coupons, my reading glasses beside yesterday's newspaper, the oak cabinets I installed myself in 1997 after 3 weekends of swearing and measuring mistakes. Confused. I had spent 38 years as senior payroll accountant for Mercer Freight Logistics. I managed pension audits worth millions of dollars. I caught an embezzlement scheme in 2003 that nearly collapsed one of our regional offices. But now my daughter spoke to me the way nurses speak to sedated patients. You forgot Mrs. Hargrove's funeral too, Lauren added softly. No, I said again. I chose not to go. That's not what you told me. Because what I told her was that I couldn't bear another funeral after Diane. But grief, apparently, sounds a lot like dementia when your children start looking at your bank accounts. I have to go, Lauren said. We'll come by Saturday around noon. Don't stress yourself out reading those papers. The line disconnected before I answered. I sat there listening to the refrigerator hum. Then I opened the folder again. The assisted living brochure showed smiling gray-haired couples holding wine glasses beside a fake fireplace. One woman wore pearls while laughing at salad. No one in those places ever laughs like that. I know because Diane's mother died in one. Room 214, third floor. The hallway always smelled like bleach and canned peas. The brochure claimed Silver Pines offered dignified, independent living. The monthly cost circled in red marker was $6,800. Interesting number, because my pension and Social Security together totaled $5,940 a month, meaning someone had already decided the difference would come from my savings. I reached for my coffee. Cold, bitter enough to taste metallic. That's when I noticed another paper buried beneath the brochure. A pre-filled durable power of attorney form. My daughter had already typed in her own name. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription. Saturday arrived wet and gray. The kind of New Jersey rain that never fully commits to becoming storm. Just cold drizzle hanging in the air like an unpaid debt. By 11:30, water streaked the front windows in crooked lines, and the gutters rattled every few minutes with another lazy spill of runoff. I spent the morning making beef stew, not because anyone asked for it, because Diane used to make stew on ugly days. And after 46 years of marriage, your body continues certain rituals long after the person is gone. Celery, onion, carrots cut too thick because my fingers stiffen in the cold now. I browned the meat slowly in the Dutch oven while Sinatra played low from the radio beside the microwave. Domestic little sounds. The lid clinking. The knife against the cutting board. The furnace kicking on. Strange how ordinary life remains while betrayal organizes itself in folders. At 12:07, Lauren's white Lexus pulled into the driveway. Right on time. Kevin climbed out first, holding an umbrella over himself but not over my daughter. That told you nearly everything about their marriage if you paid attention. Kevin always protected what he considered expensive. Lauren carried another folder, thicker this time. I opened the door before they knocked. "Dad," she said brightly, kissing my cheek with cool lips that smelled faintly of peppermint gum. "You should really lock the front door during the day. I was expecting you." "Yes, but still." Kevin stepped inside carefully, wiping his loafers on the mat like my house was a hotel lobby. "Arthur," he said, "how are you feeling?" That question had started changing meaning lately. Not how are you? How are you functioning? How coherent are you today? How close are we to taking over your finances? "I'm alive," I answered. Kevin gave the same tight little smile accountants and undertakers use. Lauren immediately noticed the stew simmering. "Oh, Dad," she frowned. "You left the burner on?" "I'm cooking." "For how long?" "Since this morning." "That's dangerous." I stared at her. When exactly did boiling meat become dangerous? Kevin chuckled softly, like I'd made a charming mistake. That irritated me more than if he'd insulted me outright. They sat at the kitchen table, while Lauren spread papers across the surface beside the salt shaker and the basket of rye bread. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. My kitchen suddenly felt smaller than usual. "There are just a few things we need to organize," Lauren said in the tone people use before removing life support. She slid the power of attorney form toward me. "We talked about this already." "We talked," I corrected. "You mostly explained." Kevin folded his hands. "This is really about protection, Arthur. At your age, financial scams happen constantly. Predatory contractors, online fraud, confusion with medication. I balance payroll accounts for 800 employees. Yes, but that was years ago." There it was again, the quiet erasing of a person. Past tense replacing identity. Lauren pointed at one of the forms. "This would just let me help manage things if necessary." "If necessary." "Dad, please don't make this emotional." I actually laughed at that. A short, ugly sound. You bring legal documents into my kitchen and ask for control of my accounts. But I'm the emotional one? Lauren inhaled sharply through her nose. Diane used to do that before arguments too. Except with Diane, it usually meant honesty was coming. With Lauren, it meant impatience. "Okay," she said carefully. "Then let's discuss specifics." She opened the second folder. Bank statements. My bank statements. Highlighted in yellow marker. You withdrew $800 cash on February 3rd. I bought a transmission for the Buick. You paid cash. Yes. Why? Because Frank at Russo Auto gives discounts for cash. Kevin leaned back in his chair, exchanging a glance with her. A glance. Cunning. Fast. But practiced. People think old age makes you blind. It mostly makes you observing. Lauren continued. And there's the issue with the wire transfers. That caught my attention. What wire transfers? The transfers from your investment account into checking. I transferred my own money. Yes, but you moved nearly $90,000 over 14 months. I looked at her for a long moment. Then realization arrived slowly, heavily, like a truck backing into fog. Not concern. Inventory. They had been tracking my accounts. Kevin finally spoke. We're just trying to understand where the money's going. I stood and walked to the stove, lifted the lid. Steam rolled upward, carrying the smell of onions and red wine. I stirred the stew slowly while my heartbeat thickened in my ears, because suddenly certain things rearranged themselves in my mind. Lauren insisting on helping with online banking after Diane died. Kevin asking casual questions about my CDs. The calls about updating beneficiaries. The strange eagerness whenever property taxes came up. I turned back toward them. Why exactly are you reviewing my spending? Silence. Lauren softened her voice instantly, too instantly. Dad, because we're worried. No, I said quietly. You're counting. Rain hammered harder against the windows. Kevin cleared his throat. Arthur, nobody's accusing you of anything. But you highlighted my grocery withdrawals. Lauren pushed another document toward me. This is about long-term planning. Silver Pines has an opening in September. But we'd need to act quickly. There it was. Not a possibility. A schedule. My eyes moved down the page. Projected asset liquidation. Estimated home sale value. $812,000. Retirement account transfer strategy. Every line item neat and professional. My house. Reduced to columns. I felt something cold settle beneath my ribs. Not sadness anymore. Recognition. Then Lauren made the mistake that changed everything. She reached across the table and patted my hand gently. Dad, she said almost tenderly. I know this is hard when you're old and confused. Old and confused. The phrase landed softly, but something inside me went absolutely still, because at that exact moment, I remembered something from 30 years in accounting. People only rush paperwork when they're afraid time is about to expose them. The first thing people misunderstand about humiliation is this. It rarely arrives screaming. Most humiliation comes dressed as politeness. Thanksgiving that year fell on November 27th. Cold enough for breath to show outside, but not cold enough for snow. By noon, my house smelled like rosemary, turkey grease, and the sweet burnt edge of pecan pie crust. I woke at 5:30 to start cooking, not because I had to, because habit is stronger than dignity sometimes. The turkey was 22 pounds, too large for 5 adults and 2 grandchildren. But supermarkets only sold the smaller birds frozen solid by Thanksgiving week, and I refused to pay $90 for organic nonsense wrapped in twine. I basted every 40 minutes. Mashed potatoes at 10. Green beans with almonds at 11:15. The old Panasonic radio played jazz softly beside the sink while I peeled carrots. Bitwo o'clock the house looked warm enough to fool strangers into believing families stayed grateful forever. Lauren arrived first with Kevin and the boys. Ethan was 16 now and permanently attached to wireless headphones that cost more than my first television. Mason barely looked up from his phone while stepping over the welcome mat Diane bought in Vermont 20 years earlier. Smells good, Kevin said automatically. He was already checking work emails. Lauren carried wine bottles she expected me to admire because they had French labels. Dad, she said carefully while hanging her coat. You remembered to lower the oven after basting, right? I stared at her. Yes, Lauren. I remembered how ovens work. Oh, a quick smile. Good. Little cuts. That was her method. Tiny public corrections, delivered sweetly enough to sound caring. My sister Eleanor arrived 20 minutes later wearing a purple wool coat and enough perfume to fumigate insects. Eleanor was 75 and terrifyingly observant. She hugged me tightly in the hallway. You look tired, she whispered. I am tired. Not what I meant. Then she looked past me toward Lauren arranging napkins at the dining table with the rigid intensity of a woman managing a corporate merger instead of Thanksgiving dinner. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Turkey, wine, the boys arguing over cranberry sauce, football playing quietly in the den. Normal sounds. But tension sat beneath everything like exposed wiring behind drywall. I noticed Lauren watching me every time I reached for something. The gravy boat, the carving knife, the wine, monitoring. At one point I stood to refill my water glass, and Kevin immediately half rose from his chair. You okay there, Arthur? Yes. You looked unsteady. I stood up. An awkward silence followed. Mason snorted into his potatoes. Lauren shot him a warning look. Then Eleanor spoke for the first time in 10 minutes. For heaven's sake, he's 72, not recovering from surgery. Lauren forced a smile. We're just looking out for him. Eleanor buttered her roll slowly. Amen. I loved my sister very much in that moment. The conversation drifted toward real estate prices. That was Kevin's favorite subject besides tax shelters and himself. Montclair values are climbing again, he said. A house on our block sold for 1.4 last month. Insane, Lauren replied. Honestly, Dad's property alone is probably worth close to 900 now. There it was again. Not my home. Property. Asset value. I kept carving turkey. Kevin sipped wine. The market's hot for downsizing right now, too. Especially for seniors, Lauren added quickly. Eleanor looked up sharply. Seniors? Lauren smiled too fast. I just mean maintenance gets difficult. I changed my own brake pads Tuesday. That's not really the point, Dad. No, it wasn't. The point sat inside the manila envelope partially hidden in Lauren's purse beside her chair. I'd noticed it the moment she walked in. Silver Pine's logo. She followed my eyes and subtly pushed the purse farther beneath the table. That tiny movement told me more than any argument could have. Then came a moment. Always one moment. The boys had moved into the den after dinner. Football commentators shouted faintly from the television while rain tapped softly against the windows. I was carrying coffee cups toward the sink when Lauren suddenly said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, Dad, leave those. You'll drop them. The room went quiet. I looked down at the mugs in my hands, then back at my daughter. I've carried coffee before. It's just safer if I do it. Safer. Eleanor stopped chewing. Kevin stared very hard at his wine glass, and something ugly finally rose into my throat. Not rage exactly. Accumulation. Years of swallowed comments hardening all at once. I set the cups down carefully. Too carefully. You know, I said, you become very interested in what I can and can't manage. Lauren's face tightened instantly. Dad, not today. No, let's do today. Kevin leaned forward. Arthur. No, I held up a hand. I'd like to hear this. Lauren crossed her arms. We're trying to help you. By pricing assisted living facilities? Silence. Kevin's jaw shifted. Eleanor slowly lowered her fork. What facilities? She asked. Lauren shot me a furious look. Dad, you left brochures in my kitchen. That was private. In my house. It was for discussion purposes. The sweetness vanished from her voice now. Finally. Good. Truth usually arrives angry. Eleanor looked between us carefully. Lauren, she said slowly, are you trying to move your father out of his own home? No. Lauren snapped too quickly. We're trying to protect him because somebody has to. Protect me from what? You forget things. I forget where I left my reading glasses occasionally. That's called being human. You left the garage open. For 20 minutes. You repeat stories. So does every person over 60. Kevin finally intervened. Arthur, nobody's attacking you. Then stop discussing me like I'm already dead. That landed. Hard. The room froze completely. Even the football commentators seemed quieter somehow. Lauren's face flushed dark red. Then she said it. The sentence I think she'd been rehearsing for months. You're old and confused, Dad. Everyone sees it except you. Everyone. Interesting word. I looked around my own dining room. The chandelier Diane picked in 1994. The china cabinet filled with 40 years of holidays. Steam still rising faintly from abandoned coffee cups. Then I looked at my daughter. And for the first time in my life, I saw greed more clearly than love in her face. That changes a person. Quietly, permanently. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I found the email by accident. That's the truth people never believe afterward. They imagine revelations arriving dramatically. Hidden safes, overheard phone calls, strangers confessing in parking garages. But betrayal usually exposes itself through exhaustion and carelessness. In this case, through Lauren forgetting to log out of my laptop. She had come over Tuesday afternoon claiming she wanted to organize my digital paperwork. By then I'd started noticing how often she used words like organize, streamline, transition, corporate language for personal theft. She sat at my dining room table for nearly 2 hours, clicking through accounts while drinking herbal tea she brought herself because apparently my coffee was too acidic. When she left, the house smelled faintly of her expensive perfume and printer ink. I didn't touch the laptop until almost midnight. I couldn't sleep. My knee hurt. Rain tapped softly against the gutters again. And the digital clock beside my bed glowed 12:43 in pale green numbers. So I shuffled into the kitchen wearing Diane's old gray robe and heated leftover stew in the microwave. That microwave still had a burn mark inside from 2011 when Kevin tried warming foil-wrapped lasagna and nearly started a fire. Funny man to lecture me about safety. I carried the bowl into the den and opened the laptop mostly to distract myself. ESPN headlines. Weather forecast. Crossword puzzle maybe. Instead, I saw Lauren's email inbox. Still open. At first, I intended to close it immediately. Then I noticed the subject line. Arthur Bellamy capacity evaluation. Capacity. Not health. Not wellness. Capacity. I clicked before my conscience could object. The email chain stretched back nearly 4 months. Attorney. Financial advisor. Someone from Silver Pines. Lauren. Kevin. And attached beneath them all. Projected asset summary, Arthur Bellamy. I read every word twice. Estimated home value, $912,000. Investment accounts, $418,000. Savings and checking, $96,340. Pension income, insurance policies. My entire life reduced to bullet points. Then came the sentence that made my hands go cold despite the heat blasting from the vent beside my chair. Once cognitive decline is formally documented, transition of financial authority should proceed smoothly. Cognitive decline. Documented. Not suspected. Planned. I scrolled farther. There were notes for meetings I never knew existed. Kevin discussing risk exposure. Lauren asking how quickly property liquidation could happen after conservatorship approval. A recommendation from someone named Melissa Grant at Silver Pines, suggesting they secure POA signatures before resistance escalates. Resistance. That was me now. Not father. Not homeowner. Not human being. Resistance. The stew sat untouched beside me, growing cold again. I kept reading. Then I found the bank records. 3 separate home equity withdrawals against my property. $40,000 in March. $25,000 in June. $18,500 in September. I stared at the numbers, genuinely confused for the first time in months, because I had never authorized them. My pulse began hammering hard enough to blur my vision. I opened another attachment, electronic authorization forms. My signature appeared at the bottom, except it wasn't my signature. Close enough to fool a bank, employee processing digital paperwork. Not close enough to fool the man who signed payroll authorizations for nearly 40 years. Kevin had practiced it, slowly, carefully. The room suddenly felt airless. I stood too quickly and nearly dropped the laptop. My chest tightened with a sharp, ugly pressure that scared me for one terrible second. 72-year-old men are allowed exactly one moment of panic before practicality takes over. I sat back down, breathed carefully. Then I printed everything, every email, every attachment, every transfer record. The printer groaned and spat warm paper into the tray, while the house remained absolutely silent around me. At 1:26 a.m., another email notification appeared. From Lauren to Kevin. She must have been awake too. Dad's getting suspicious. He pushed back hard at Thanksgiving. Kevin replied 3 minutes later. Then we need the doctor documentation finalized before Christmas. Another message. Do you think Judge Holloway will sign conservatorship if Peterson confirms impairment? Kevin. At his age? Absolutely. I leaned back slowly in Diane's recliner. Outside, headlights swept briefly across the living room wall as some passing car moved through the rain. Conservatorship. Jesus Christ. They weren't trying to help me retire. They were trying to legally erase me. And suddenly dozens of little moments rearranged themselves into something monstrous. Lauren insisting on attending doctor appointments. The strange questions from Dr. Peterson about memory lapses. The repeated emphasis on confusion. Kevin asking detailed questions about deed records and beneficiary structures. A campaign, carefully documented, professionally organized. I looked around the room. Diane's knitting basket still sat untouched beside the sofa, exactly where she left it before chemotherapy made her hands too weak to continue. The Afghan she never finished remained folded neatly inside. 47 years together. And now our daughter was trying to process my life like an estate transaction before I was even dead. That hurt worse than the money. Far worse. The financial theft was ugly. The humiliation was ugly. But this was burial while breathing. At 2:04 in the morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 6 years. Harold Finch, retired attorney, former Mercer Freight legal counsel, widower, made enough to survive old age properly. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding furious. "Do you know what time it is?" "Yes." A pause. Then his voice softened slightly. "Arthur, I need a lawyer." Silence. "You in trouble?" "No," I said quietly, staring at the stack of printed emails beside me. "I think my daughter is." Harold arrived the next morning at 8:15 carrying a Dunkin' coffee and wearing the same brown overcoat he'd owned since the Clinton administration. He read the documents for nearly an hour without speaking. Only the occasional turn of paper, the ticking kitchen clock, the low hiss of my radiator. Finally, he removed his glasses and said 5 words that changed the direction of my remaining life. "This is elder financial abuse." Not confusion, not misunderstanding. Abuse. The words settled heavily into the kitchen. Solid, legal, real. Harold tapped one of the forged signatures. "You understand this could become criminal." I looked down at my daughter's emails, at phrases like asset transition and compliance strategy. Then I remembered her hand patting mine gently across the Thanksgiving table. Old and confused. I poured myself another cup of coffee. Black. Steady hand. "No," I said softly. "They made it criminal already." The court hearing was scheduled for March 14th, 2025, Friday, 9:30 a.m., Essex County Probate Division, Room 4B. I remember the details because old men remember appointments the way prisoners remember release dates. Harold picked me up at 7:30 sharp in his silver Volvo that smelled permanently of legal pads and peppermint. Rain threatened again that morning. Low clouds hanging over Newark like dirty wool blankets. Neither of us spoke much during the drive. There are silences built from comfort, others from fear. This one came from preparation. I wore my charcoal suit from Diane's funeral. Still fit mostly, though the waist tightened when I sat too long. My tie was navy blue, with tiny white dots Lauren once bought me for Father's Day before she started treating me like a defective appliance. In the back seat sat 3 banker's boxes, documents, printouts, bank statements, property records, forged signatures, emails. 38 years in accounting teaches you one important truth. Numbers betray people more honestly than emotions ever will. The courthouse smelled like wet coats and burnt coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead while security guards waved tired people through metal detectors. Divorce cases, probate disputes, child support hearings, human disappointment lined up in folding chairs beneath state-issued paint. Lauren arrived at 8:52. Kevin beside her. She froze for half a second when she saw Harold carrying the document boxes. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. Like a gambler realizing the other player actually knows the rules. Then the performance began. "Dad." Her voice softened instantly. Concerned daughter mode. "You didn't tell me you hired counsel." Counsel. Interesting how quickly I stopped being confused once lawyers appeared. Kevin stepped forward, offering a grim little smile. "Arthur, nobody wants this to become hostile." Hostile. Another professional word covering something rotten. Harold answered before I could. "Mr. Bellamy's position is that attempted fraudulent conservatorship tends to create hostility naturally. Kevin's jaw tightened. Lauren touched my arm gently. Public tenderness, carefully calibrated for observers. Dad, please. Her eyes widened slightly. You know this was only about protecting you. I looked at her hand resting on my sleeve, then at the same fingers holding forged banking documents and printed emails 3 months earlier. I moved my arm away. Her expression flickered. Only briefly, but I saw it. Anger beneath panic. Good. At 9:27, we entered courtroom 4B. Small room. Dark wood. State flag near the bench. The smell of paper and radiator heat. Judge Eleanor Holloway looked exactly like every competent older woman who ever terrified mediocre men in offices. Mid-60s. Silver hair. Reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Lauren had filed for emergency conservatorship based on documented cognitive decline and financial instability. Financial instability. That nearly made me laugh. The woman had stolen over $80,000 from me and arrived claiming I couldn't manage money. Court clerks shuffled papers, while attorneys whispered around us. Then proceedings began. Lauren's attorney stood first. Smooth voice, expensive suit, artificial sympathy. He described me as a vulnerable elderly individual exhibiting memory deterioration, impaired judgment, and inability to safely manage independent financial obligations. I sat quietly listening while strangers discussed me like damaged furniture. Then came Dr. Peterson's statement. Preliminary concerns, possible cognitive impairment, signs of confusion, increasing dependency. Interesting what doctors conclude when fed curated stories for months. Judge Holloway adjusted her glasses. And Mr. Bellamy contest these findings? Harold stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. Strongly. He handed folders to the clerk. Then he began, calmly, methodically, like a man disassembling a bomb. Mr. Bellamy maintained independent financial records for 4 decades as senior payroll accountant at Mercer Freight Logistics. We have evidence not only of competency, but of systematic financial exploitation by the petitioner. Lauren visibly stiffened. Kevin stopped blinking. Harold continued, specifically, forged authorization signatures, unauthorized home equity withdrawals totaling $83,500, coordinated attempts to establish conservatorship under false pretenses, and documented discussions regarding preemptive liquidation of my client's assets. The courtroom shifted subtly. Tiny movements. Attention sharpening. Judge Holloway looked toward Lauren. Ms. Bellamy, are you aware of these allegations? Lauren's face flushed immediately. Your Honor, this is completely distorted. We were helping my father manage increasingly erratic decisions. Harold slid another stack of documents forward. Then perhaps petitioner can explain these email exchanges discussing asset transition strategy prior to any formal diagnosis. The judge began reading silently. The room grew very still. I watched Lauren carefully. For the first time in months, she looked uncertain, not because of morality, because control was slipping. Then came the moment, the one I still replay sometimes while making coffee in the morning. Judge Holloway looked directly at Lauren and asked one simple question. Did you or did you not authorize 3 home equity withdrawals against your father's property? Lauren swallowed. Kevin leaned toward her, whispering something urgently. Too late. Those funds were for family expenses, she said carefully. Answer the question. Another pause. Yes. Did Mr. Bellamy consent? Yes, verbally. Harold immediately handed over signature comparisons. Original signatures. Forged signatures. Dates. Transfer records. Judge Holloway studied them for nearly 30 seconds. Long enough for Lauren's breathing to become visible from across the room. Then the judge turned toward me. Mr. Bellamy. Yes, Your Honor. You maintain these signatures are fraudulent? Yes. You're certain? I reached into my inside jacket pocket and removed a small black ledger book. Old habit. I'd recorded personal finances by hand since 1981. Dates, transfers, notes, every major expense. I opened directly to March 3rd, 2024. March 3rd, I said calmly. I was in Philadelphia attending my grandson's regional debate tournament. I paid $74.16 for hotel parking at 8:42 p.m. The home equity authorization was electronically submitted from Montclair at 8:51. Silence. I turned another page. June 17th. I was having cataract follow-up treatment at St. Barnabas between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. Yet another authorization was processed online at 2:13 p.m. Another page. September 9th. I was in Vermont with my sister Eleanor. The judge stared at me for a long moment, then at Lauren, then at Kevin, and suddenly the entire room understood something very simple. The confused person in that courtroom was not me. Lauren finally cracked. "Dad, this is insane," she burst out. "After everything we've done for you." "Done for me?" Her voice rose higher now. "You couldn't even manage your own medications after Mom died." "That's enough," Judge Holloway snapped sharply. But Lauren was unraveling. "You forget things constantly. You leave bills unopened. You repeat yourself. You are old and confused." The words echoed harshly across the courtroom. No sweetness left now. No concern. Just fury. Judge Holloway leaned back slowly in her chair. And for the first time that morning, she looked at my daughter not as a caretaker, but as a predator who'd spoken to honestly by accident. The final order came 17 days later. March 31st, 2025, 11:12 a.m. I remember because I was replacing the batteries in the hallway smoke detector when Harold called. The ladder wobbled beneath me as I answered. "Well," he said, "the court has officially decided you're not senile." Relief of the century. I'd frame the ruling if I were you. I climbed down carefully and sat at the kitchen table while he summarized everything in that dry courtroom voice lawyers use when discussing human wreckage. Emergency conservatorship denied. Financial power requests voided. Formal referral for elder financial abuse investigation approved. Temporary freeze placed on certain transfers linked to Kevin and Lauren. The forged equity withdrawals had become a criminal matter. I listened quietly while sunlight moved slowly across the kitchen floorboards. Outside, somebody nearby was mowing grass for the first time that spring. The smell drifted faintly through the cracked window. Wet dirt, gasoline, cut weeds. Ordinary life again. That surprised me most. You expect the world to pause after betrayal. It never does. "You still there?" Harold asked. "Yes." "You all right?" I looked around the kitchen. Diane's copper pans hanging above the stove. The old calendar still turned to March. My reading glasses beside the newspaper. Then I noticed something else. Silence. No hovering concern. No monitoring. No suspicious politeness disguised as care. Just my house, breathing normally again. "I think so," I answered. Harold cleared his throat. "There's another thing." "Go ahead." "Lauren's attorney contacted me this morning. She wants mediation before criminal proceedings move further." Of course she did, because consequences always feel unfair to people who plan them for someone else. "What kind of mediation?" "Restitution. Repayment schedule. They're asking you not to cooperate fully with prosecutors." I laughed softly, not bitterly anymore. Almost tired. Kevin had spent months building spreadsheets around my extinction, and now suddenly they wanted family compassion. Interesting timing. Harold waited. "Well," he asked. I stood and poured coffee into Diane's old sunflower mug. Black, 2 sugars. My hand remained perfectly steady. "Tell him no." A long pause. Then Harold chuckled quietly. "That's what I hoped you'd say." After we hung up, I carried the coffee into the den and sat beside the front window. Rain had finally stopped after nearly a week of gray skies. Sunlight touched the maple tree Diane planted decades earlier, and tiny green buds had begun appearing along the branches. Life continuing stubbornly. I thought about Lauren as a little girl, 8 years old, missing front tooth, begging me to push her higher on the tire swing in our backyard, while Diane yelled that I'd send her into orbit. Memory is cruel that way. Even after someone betrays you, your mind preserves the earlier versions lovingly. The child remains innocent forever. Only the adult becomes unbearable. At 2:43 that afternoon, Lauren called. I almost ignored it. Almost. But some habits survive devastation too. "Hello?" For several seconds she didn't speak. Then, "Dad." Her voice sounded smaller than before. Not remorseful exactly. Cornered. I heard the ruling, she said quietly. Yes. Another silence. You really reported us. Us. Notice that. Not Kevin forged signatures. Not mistakes were made. Us. A shared business venture gone wrong. You stole from me, I said. We were trying to help. You took loans against my house. We would have paid them back. When? No answer. Only breathing. Then the anger arrived again, sharp and familiar. You embarrassed me in court, she snapped suddenly. I actually closed my eyes at that. Not because it hurt. Because it revealed everything. You forged legal documents, I said softly. And you're worried about embarrassment. You made me look like a criminal. No, I replied. You did that yourself. The silence afterwards stretched long enough that I thought she'd hung up. Then she spoke again, quieter now. You really think I'm some terrible person? I looked out the window toward the driveway where she used to draw chalk flowers as a child while waiting for me to come home from work. No, I said honestly. I think you became comfortable treating me like an obstacle instead of a father. That landed harder than shouting would have. I heard her inhale sharply. For one brief second, I almost pitted her. Then I remember the emails. Asset transition strategy. Resistance escalation. Cognitive decline documentation. No, some lines, once crossed, poison everything behind them. I loved you very much, Lauren, I said quietly. The past tense hit her immediately. Dad. But somewhere along the way you started counting my life in dollar amounts. She began crying then. Real crying this time. Ugly, uneven. But grief and guilt are not the same thing. People confuse them constantly. I'm sorry, she whispered. Maybe she even meant it. Partially. But apologies arriving after subpoenas always sound different. I listened without interrupting. Then finally I said the only truthful thing left between us. You called me old and confused. Her crying stopped abruptly. And now a judge has decided who was confused. I hung up before she answered. That evening, I made myself dinner. Nothing dramatic. Tomato soup from a carton. Grilled cheese with too much butter. Pickles on the side. I ate alone at the kitchen table while the 6 o'clocknas muttered in the background about interest rates and some senator under investigation. The house creaked softly around me. Not lonely, just quiet. There's a difference. After dinner, I washed the dishes immediately instead of leaving them overnight like Diane used to tease me about. Then I walked room to room, turning off lights carefully, touching walls and furniture as I went. My house, still mine. Upstairs, I paused beside the hallway mirror. Old man looking back. Gray hair, wrinkles, reading glasses, hanging crooked. But his eyes were clear. Clear enough to recognize greed when it arrived smiling. Clear enough to survive his own family. Clear enough to understand one final thing. Age does not make a person weak. It only reveals who is waiting for you to become vulnerable.